Welcome to the world of Working Designs. Today we are looking at Working Designs' fourth game release, the action RPG Exile, developed by Telnet. Exile, originally known in Japan as XZR II, was originally released in 1989 for Japanese computers, such as the MSX II and the PC-88, before being pretty much fully remade as Exile for the Turbografx CD and Sega Genesis in 1991. These two ports were released in North America separately by Working Designs and Renovation Software respectively in 1992. The initial release of the game was a direct sequel to XZR, a similar action RPG released in 1988, also for Japanese PCs, that was never ported to home consoles or released outside of Japan. The Turbo CD/Genesis version differs greatly from the previous PC releases in terms of graphics, level design, and overall story. In fact, the original version features an additional ending chapter where the protagonist, Sadler, time travels to the late 1980s and assassinates the head of the United States and the USSR. Crazy stuff! The remade version that the West got doesn't really miss anything from these chapters being excluded, and the Turbo CD/Genesis releases are pretty much universally hailed as the best, most coherent versions of this game. That being said, a fan translation of the original MSX release is available if you want to try it. Exile features some pretty mature themes and plot points revolving around religion, politics, and drug use. For the most part, the game handles all of these points well in a sophisticated manner. Exile takes place in the ancient Middle East in a period of clashing religious wars over Holy Lands, and either alludes to or directly references real-life historical figures, events, and landmarks, like the Crusades, the Templar Knights, Baghdad, and more. These references range from major points like lead party member Hugues de Payne, who is essentially Hugh de Payne, the co-founder of the Templar Knights and their first Grand Master, to small encounters with Pythagoras, the Greek math guy. All of these themes and settings were, and are, fairly unconventional for video games, especially of that time. Exile's use of these things makes for an engaging and unique ride. Unfortunately, some names and terms were censored at the mandate of Turbografx's parent company, NEC, but it doesn't take much imagination to figure out where the truth really is. Exile starts with Arabic assassin Sadler reuniting with friend and love interest Rumi, the Vizier Fakil, and strongman Kindi in a small village in Afghanistan when they are called to investigate a spy in the village. The encounter leads them to the leader of the Crispin, really the Christian, Templar Knights, Hugues de Payne. He confides in Sadler and his companions that he is seeking the Holy Max, a divine relic that he can use to unite the warring factions and bring them all peace. Hugues requests that Sadler aid him in his quest, and with some skepticism, Sadler agrees to help. The party sets off on a wide-trekking adventure to gather wisdom, find power, and aid to locate and utilize the Holomax. They travel all across the Middle East and to India, France, and even Japan, or their equivalents. Along the way, they encounter profound prophecies, mythic monsters, and several narrative twists and turns that really keep the player glued to the action. The plot has depth and is very well developed and paced. The stakes are high, challenges are captivating, and characters are memorable and serve the plot well. The plot intertwines with gameplay and settings very well. Every element complements each other in a neat and tidy fashion. Gameplay in Exile can be divided into two sections: overworld exploration and side-scrolling action. The overhead segments have you controlling Sadler's party as they explore the world and talk to NPCs. It is in these segments where most of the plot unfolds. The other half of the game takes the form of a side-scroller where you control Sadler as he fights his way through various action stages with branching paths. Sort of like a Metroidvania game, I guess. The closest analog I have for how the game switches between these modes that I can think of is Zelda 2. But here everything feels much more linear, consistent, and far less annoying. Sadler controls well as you hack and slash your way through enemies. Enemies and levels are all pretty varied and well designed. Although levels can be a little maze-like, everything is designed with enough attention to detail that you rarely get lost. Shortly into the game, you also get magic at your disposal that grows stronger and more varied as you level up. However, magic isn't used in quite a conventional way. Instead of arming yourself with magic as an ability or item, it is simply turned on or off. For example, if you want to use fire strikes with your sword, you go up to the magic menu and turn it on, and you will attack with fire using these magic points until you turn the ability off again. Items are also interesting. There is standard equipment like weapons and armor, and also consumable items. The items were all narcotics like cocaine and heroin in the various PC versions, but in all versions of the Turbo CD/Genesis release, they have been changed to tonics, like heart poison or a venom. There are standard HP recovery items, but many of these tonics are used as uppers and downers to temporarily alter Sadler's action stats, such as attack, power, and defense. These stats are observable by the pulsing bars at the bottom of the screen. These items are useful enough, but they aren't very necessary for beating the game. The graphics and music in Exile are pretty great. The graphics are detailed with lots of color and are well designed. Each action stage is distinct with its own flair and tone, and the overhead sections do a great job of fitting their respective settings. In action stages, enemies and character sprites are large with nice animation, and there are plenty of different models for each stage. The overhead areas are a little more plain, but there's nothing really wrong with them. The cutscenes are wonderful. The art is rich, colorful, and expressive. The animation is somewhat limited with this being a standard Turbo CD game and not a Super CD format game, but the action is all purposeful and makes things feel very, well, animated and alive. The voice acting in Exile is a step up from Cosmic Fantasy II, but I still wouldn't say it's aged too gracefully.
Clispin Crusaders have become nothing more than mobsters. I can no longer tolerate the wanton destruction they bring upon peaceful people. If only a great ruler could arise to unite our people, it would put an end to these wars of religious intolerance and greed. Mankind would finally have a chance to work together peacefully. Oh, it could be.
One great ruler for all mankind, uniting heathens and Clispins alike. A mighty dream.
What? Who's there?
The music is nice. It's all varied and appropriately moody for each environment and has a nice rhythm to it. The action music is repeated, but I never got bored of it. The sound effects, on the other hand, can be a little repetitive. The dialogue sound especially can be a little grating, but I got used to it after a while. When you compare the Genesis and Turbo CD releases, the Turbo CD version of Exile is the clear winner. The graphics are pretty similar, but the Turbo CD takes advantage of the Turbografx's larger color palette available, and when it shows, it shows. The animated cutscenes and Redbook audio are a big leg up over the Genesis offerings as well. The translation is also much more refined, and the overall story and themes are understood on the Turbografx CD much better. The Genesis version isn't really bad, but if you have a choice of what to play, I would definitely stick with Working Designs' Turbografx CD release. Exile is an early Working Designs release, and like with most of their early releases, they didn't do a whole lot of meddling with the game. Enemies in a few places, as well as some bosses, were made stronger and more difficult, so there is a bit more grinding to be done here, but it's really not that bad. Working Designs did, however, remove the optional teleportation spell, so there is some more mandatory backtracking, and that gets a little old in some action stages. The script is solid. There are only 1 or 2 lines that were made to be a bit quirkier than originally intended. These 1 or 2 lines do stand out, but they are for such minor moments that they don't ever take you out of the experience. All in all, I think Working Designs did a great job with Exile, and I'm very glad they decided to put in the work on this version. I had a great time with Exile. It really exceeded my expectations, and the narrative threw me for a loop a few times. The gameplay is smooth, responsive, and fun. The historical fiction elements really run deep. I was honestly surprised at how deep this rabbit hole went when I did my research for this. It's a shame there isn't really the right space to do a deep dive here in this video. There's a lot. I've linked an article that does a bit of a deeper dive into these things in the description below if you are curious. Exile is on the short side. It can be completed in under 5 hours if you play well and know where to go. The difficulty curve has a few spikes here and there, but overall it's not an especially difficult time, especially if you take a little time to do some grinding along the way. I did think a few of the branching paths and a couple of the action stages were maybe a little too convoluted, but I never really got lost, so I guess that's okay. I do wish you could play as other members of your party and not just Sadler, but the game is fun regardless. That's really all the criticism I have for Exile. There's not much to whine about with this one. I really recommend that anyone who likes games of this nature give Exile a shot. Preferably the Turbo CD version if you can track down a copy, or emulate it. If not, the Genesis version shouldn't be too hard to track down. The Genesis version does cut out one whole town and censor some imagery compared to the Turbo CD version, however, so keep that in mind when you choose what you want to play. Exile is a big step up from Cosmic Fantasy II, and it was a much needed breath of fresh air. I look forward to the next game in lineup for review, and hope whatever comes next can measure up to this. I'm not sure which Working Designs game I will cover next. Chronologically, the next release is Bastille, an action strategy game for the Turbografx CD. But I think I might mix things up a bit, and I have a whole other series I want to try out too. Whatever comes next, I really hope you'll take a look. Thank you for checking out this episode of The World of Working Designs. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell thing, tell your friends, tell your ma, whatever. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon. Later!